We'll now go to the committee room to Mr. Zimmer for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Minister for attending today. So my questions will be around what my colleague, Mr. Calkins, has already referred to, and that's the selective fishery in BC. I have to read you recommendation 30 of the Cohen Commission. It says the Department of Fisheries and Oceans should designate an individual to coordinate scientific, educational, and management efforts in relation to selective fishing practices. Minister, has this been done?
I'm going to have to turn to my department because I will admit that I am not aware of that.
And in turn, I'll turn to our Regional Director General for Pacific, Rebecca Reid.
So thanks very much for the question. So we do have a selective fishing policy that we apply for salmon.
Actually, for the person that's been applied, designated individual, I just want to know if that's been done, and who is it?
So the policy is implemented by all fishery managers.
I'm actually asking about the one that says designated individual to coordinate scientific, educational, management efforts. So who is that person?
So we have a regional director of science and the regional director of fisheries management who work together on those two aspects.
So maybe I can get those names just specifically so we know who to go to after this. So I'll go back to the minister. Just in speaking about the selective fishery in BC, the BC government has been very supportive of a selective fishery in BC. As you know, I have a document that was written to the BC salmon management team at DFO. So we look forward, this is from the letter, we look forward to further discussion regarding salmon enhancement. We encourage increased Chinook mass marking to enable better management and identification of hatcheries Chinook production. This can lead to efficiencies in Chinook production and better management of harvest, which can lead to increased prey availability for the southern resident killer whale and certainly for harvesters. Further, BC encourages DFO to be flexible in its management approaches to not only conserve and protect stocks of concern, but also facilitate limited and safe harvest opportunities on abundant stocks where locally supportable. We are hopeful that all options, including marked selective fisheries, are being considered by DFO to ensure conservation and socioeconomic objectives can be achieved. Minister, we have 25 MPs that are asking for a selective fishery in BC. We're having a BC government that's asking for a selective fishery. We're having a public fishery that's asking for a selective fishery. When?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Zimmer. And I will say that, as I have said to Mr. Calkins, I'm not adverse to a marked select fishery. I do believe that...
I heard your answer, Minister, but I guess I'm asking for the next part of that answer then is when.
Would you like me finished, please?
I'm asking for when, Minister. When?
We currently have a pilot program in place. We will continue to work to find the best way forward, recognizing that the wild Pacific salmon are in dire straits in some areas. And we need to make sure that anything we do does not impact the conservation of those fish.
That's the great part about a selective fishery, Minister, is that you can selectively fish and catch certain fish and selectively not catch certain fish with fishing methods. And you know, I've done many videos, I'm sure you've seen some of them that explain what a selective fishery is and how it works. We're just asking it to be implemented. And you've said that you're doing a test fishery this summer, but test and then what? Is it a test fishery, then there's another 5 years of a pause, or we can actually move into a selective fishery that can be used BC-wide? What's your end goal, I guess? So 2021 is the test selective fishery. What's the next step?
My end goal is to make sure that we have wild Pacific salmon. That is my end goal. We have a stock that is in serious decline. We need to do everything possible. We are making sure that we are doing that. A marked select fishery is a possibility, there's no question, but we need to make sure that before anything moves ahead, we do what we have to do in order to conserve the stock that we have.
Yeah, and that's the great part about a selective fishery. It allows us to do both. You use the word collaboration a lot, and that, by Oxford's definition, is the action of working with someone to produce something. You use it a lot. You use word salads a lot, Minister. Collaboration, public fishery have been more than willing to actually do a demonstration and to show you that it works. But they don't feel collaborated with. All they feel like is that they've used data, or you've taken their data and just simply ignored it. You've ignored conversations at tables that they've been at for months. When are you going to actually establish a selective fishery? That's been asked, and I know you're going to repeat your answer, but my hope is that you'll give us a date. An expected, this is my best, Mr. Zimmer, 2021 is the test date. 2022 is maybe when we can see a 50% selective fishery. Maybe in 3 or 4 years, we can see a 100% selective fishery. Minister, we need answers now.
I have met with the Sport Fishing Advisory Board.
And you've ignored their advice.
Could
Sorry,
I please
Mr.
finish the
Zimmer,
question? Thank you.
Your time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to give my time to Mr. Zimmer from British Columbia.
All right, Mr. Zimmer for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Calkins, Mr. Chair, and our minister. So getting back to the Sport Fishing Advisory Board and the questions I was posing to you before I ran out of time, this from the BC government, once again. We also encourage DFO to implement some of the specific fishery proposals that have been put forward that balance conservation with harvest opportunities where possible, including those marked selective fishing opportunities recommended by the Sport Fishing Advisory Board. So I'm going to read a document from the SFAB. This is their warning to the ministry and advice. In order to sustain both wild Chinook stocks of concern and the recreational and potentially other fisheries, it is critically important that DFO make the policy decision as soon as possible to implement mass marking of hatchery origin Chinook in BC to enable widespread marked selective fishery management when non-selective management poses too high of risk to stocks of concern. Minister, when are you going to implement a selective fishery in BC?
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. As I have said, we have put a pilot program in place with regards to a marked selective fishery. There needs to be an absolute more work done when it comes to making sure that they are not going to impact the stocks of concern. We are working on that now. We have put in place areas where there can be a marked select fishery.
Once again, Minister, I think you talk about a framework because you've talked about a framework for different things before. But in fairness, you haven't stated a framework for implementing a selective fishery in BC. It's a big thing. It's going to take some work to do. That's what the Department of Fisheries and Oceans should be working on as we speak, based on Cohen Commission recommendations and other advice. Let me just, another quote from the SFAB. The SFAB cannot overstate the urgency of the situation and the critical need to implement Chinook mass marking as soon as possible. The recreational fishery infrastructure simply cannot survive widespread Chinook non-retention from April into July, and perhaps longer, around much of the inner south coast on an annual basis. We know from biosampling programs that sufficient numbers of hatchery origin Chinook are present in the Salish Sea during this time. We simply need a way for anglers to identify them in order to sustain both the fishery and unenhanced Chinook stocks of concern. Minister, we need a better answer than you're just going to do a test this summer. When are you going to implement a full-on selective fishery in BC?
We need to have the data on a marked selective fishery. That's why there is a pilot program. Your colleagues have talked about science, and we need to make decisions based on data. That's what we're doing right now. The decision on a marked selective fishery will happen once we have the proper data that shows it does not impact the stocks of concern.
Well, with respect, Minister, what's been already provided to you in terms of data is from the SFAB and many others. We have examples in Washington State and Oregon that have already gone through this process, and it's functional today. One more quote from the SFAB. It should be noted that because of sufficiently high mark rates, the opportunity exists now to implement a marked selective fishery management for Chinook at certain times. As a generalization, these potential opportunities occur around the south end of Vancouver Island and into the lower Strait of Georgia in the winter to late May period, enabled by the presence of significant numbers of U.S. and therefore adipose fin-clipped hatchery origin Chinook. Minister, you have the data. Why don't you just do it?
As I have said, there are stocks of concern that we have to be aware of. A mark select fishery, conservation always has to be our priority. Right now, a mark select fishery does not allow for fishing in an area where there are stocks of concern.
That's why it's called
That
the
is-
selective fishery, Minister, is you can selectively
I'm
not
well
catch
aware of why
the
it's
stocks
called
of
a selective
concern.
fishery, Mr. Zimmer.
Pardon me?
I said I'm well aware of why it's called a mark select fishery.
So I guess with all the data that's been presented to you and by the experts that you call on to give you advice, they've even offered that this can be done now. This can be established right now. And yet we hear stalling after stalling after stalling examples from the department about establishing a selective fishery. Even the ability to have machines that mark fish have been turned down, we've understood. So, Minister, you know, it's been given many opportunities for you to get to an easy yes answer on this. A lot of evidence, a lot of data, a lot of BC fishing families, frankly, relying upon a good decision based on data, based on science that you yourself have solicited, and you're just simply not listening to it because you want to still prevent that from happening for some reason. So I guess I just need a clear answer. If you're not going to listen to the data provided, what is it going to take?
Actually, Mr. Zimmer, you've gone way over time, so the time for an answer is well past.